Hi everyone, it's Doug along with John, Joe, and Leslie, and today we're talking fire dispatching. Do you dispatch for your local fire departments? Or maybe not. But today we're talking about that on another great episode of We Speak Dispatch.
Welcome back to another edition of We Speak Dispatch. Hello again. This time we're talking about a topic that some of us may be involved in, not all of us. And from the crew that's here, it's only 50%, but we'll engage them from the police side. So we welcome Leslie. How are you doing?
Really good. Excellent.
Excellent. And Joe, my friend who is on my side of the 50% for this topic.
That's right. Fire dispatch. John and I are going to carry the load here.
Oh, carry the load. Here we go.
Nice.
And then Doug, how you going?
Good, but I don't really know that much about fire dispatch, but let's do it anyway. Let's go.
Yeah, let's talk about it. It's not a topic that comes in regularly for classes or training. It's not a topic that I hear podcasts or certainly that we've talked about a lot. But it is an important one because, one, there are agencies that only perform fire dispatch activities. And number two, there are agencies that perform multi-role activities, such as law enforcement, fire, and I kind of lump EMS into fire, but we're really going to focus on the fire side of operations today. So if you are one of those agencies that handles fire EMS or police, sheriff, fire EMS, put on your red plastic fire helmet because that's what we're going to talk about today. One of the first things to talk about are acronyms. How many of us have different acronyms for anything fire related? We have RIT, Rapid Intervention Team. Joe, you called it something else. You know it as what else?
RIC, R-I-C, Rapid Intervention Crew.
Crew, okay. We also have PAR. Does anyone listening who is on fire dispatch perform PAR checks? Not only do you perform them, do you even know what PAR means? Because sometimes we'll just go over the radio and say, engine 420 PAR check. And we're just, because it's in the manual or because someone trained us that way, we said, oh, okay, I'll ask it. So Joe, please tell us what PAR stands for.
PAR is Personnel Accountability Report, I believe is what it stands for. And so when you radio to them on scene and you're checking PAR, if they come back and say that they are PAR, it means that they're good. They don't need any resources. Everybody inside the fire is good. Everybody outside the fire. And at large events, usually the incident commander will go around with everybody on scene and check PAR for everybody there.
Good. And we also have not an acronym, but a term, Mayday. That's one that we always got to be on the lookout for when essentially there's a firefighter in trouble and it's a life-threatening situation. And hopefully we never hear that in our career, number one. But also, if we do, we know what procedures to take because fire departments and fire dispatch agencies have different policies and processes when certain acronyms or terms are mentioned and what actions to take. So the first challenge is, do you know what actions to take at your dispatch center when some of these acronyms or terms come up? Leslie, go ahead.
So it's interesting, especially because we were talking earlier about parroting and how important it is that the dispatcher is a part of the conversation. And I'm curious because I was only police only dispatch. So can you just in a general sense, kind of walk us through from the receipt of the call until it's dispatched, until the firefighters are on scene and then they've completed their assignment. What role does the dispatcher play in all of that?
Oh, they play a huge role. I'm going to talk to a lot of agencies that may listen to us because the fire world's made up of paid departments and also volunteer departments.
Good point.
And so paid departments, you dispatch very similar to law enforcement. They're at their station, they're manned 24 hours a day. You send out the toners at the station and they go en route. But there's a lot of fire departments that are volunteer, and those pages go out. They go out to their pagers, their radio, however they listen to. They're notified over several different platforms, and they respond typically to their centralized volunteer fire department, get whatever apparatus they need, and then they respond to the scene. While all that's going on, you may send out a second page. You may have to communicate if they don't have enough with the next responding closest agency. Once they go en route, you're giving them additional details and updates. Then they get there. And during a building fire, they may be upgrading the alarm level. So sending additional resources, jotting everything down. The role of dispatcher is very similar to a complex law enforcement event in terms of you're giving them all of the updates, you're updating the call for service, you're getting them resources that they need and request. So then they go and scene or maybe jump in the ambulance and transport somebody, whatever it might be. Go ahead.
I have another question because again, from the very beginning, you were talking things. And I'm like, I don't know what that is. So I am so old that I remember Emergency 51, and at the beginning of that show. And for those of you who have no idea, I know what I'm talking about. YouTube it. But so you mentioned tones or the page. So
Right.
when those tones go off in that station, is the tone specific to the type of call it is, or is the tone specific to that station for them to know, hey, pay attention, we're about to get sent out to something? What is the tone of the page that you're talking about? What does that do?
It's a different for most agencies, probably. It depends on the alerting system that they use.
I was just going to say, yeah.
One that can narrow it down all the way to if they're sleeping in different rooms, it's only going to notify certain rooms with a certain tone that the tanker only or the hazmat only needs to go. Then there's ones that are just broad, specific to a station, and sometimes based on call type. So you really have to understand your agency, but you can fine tune it down to the tone being specific to the unit or specific to the call type. So it's definitely different. But Doug, with your experience working with fire, tell me about what was the number one thing said in your dispatch center about fire in general, since you guys didn't necessarily dispatch them. What did you guys think of fire, and what was the reaction when fire was involved in calls at your agency?
Just saying that this is what I remember so much of is when we would have a crash out on the highway and it would be pretty significant. And we're trying to keep at least a lane open for traffic to keep going because LA traffic, you don't want to mess with that. But invariably, the fire truck would show up and block the one lane that's open, and everybody would lose their darn minds telling us, contact fire, tell them to move that rig out of the way. And it's like, they're not going to, they don't want to. It's like, I understand scene safety, but one thing I did learn in all my years of working with fire departments or, auxiliary, is I learned to listen to their advice, because we were at in our command post in Malibu, California, for a huge fire that happened out there. It was in the big canyon. It was a big, huge fire. And we pulled up in our command post and we parked up on a hillside looking down. And the fire department said, hey, I don't know if I would park there or not, because that's pretty close to where it's going to maybe come this way. And we're like, it ain't going to come this way. We're all right. So we sat there, we started getting everything set up, and the fire turned, and it was like scrambling to get the hell out of there in this big motorhome. So I said, next time the fire department says, don't park there, don't park there.
Yeah, one of the things that I want to bring up too, when John had mentioned Maydays and everything else, is, I've dispatched fire since I started in 1998, so quite a long time. And you learn every day, so we'll call it that. But I was at a conference, and I learned that although we may set toners off over a radio channel during a Mayday, so everybody in the structure knows evacuate, 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 what they're doing on scene, and I just learned this, so if you don't know this, find out from your agencies, is they'll go use their air horn.
Oh, yeah.
Blow it 3 times on scene, and those things are loud. And if you hear them or whatever, that's the evacuation signal to those around the structure or inside the structure to evacuate the structure, because maybe they lost radio communication or something's going on. And I didn't know they did that, and we checked, and that's pretty universally known. So I was glad to learn that in a training class I was just in.
So
Nice.
Another question, sorry, from the
Nope.
police side of the thing.
Yes, it's time to educate law enforcement.
Yes,
side
could you
on
please,
fire.
because
Yes.
this is so cool.
This is an actual training class
It
we're
is,
all talking
yes, it
about.
is.
Yes.
Do we get credit for this? Because
You will get 1 hour of CEU.
EFD credit.
There you
That's
go.
right. So obviously we know on the law enforcement side that all the officers are wearing HTs or handhelds,
Yeah.
so they all got their, okay, but you know, as y'all are talking and you're talking about radio communication, and I'm thinking of all the gear that these firefighters have to put on. Does each firefighter have their own radio? And if so, how do they communicate when they're completely covered with, you know, breathing apparatus and stuff like that? How does that work?
Usually, a lot of times, if they don't have their own, they're shared at the station. So they'll keep them in a charging bay. And as they come in for their call, they'll just grab one. But sometimes they also may direct issue them to individuals, but a lot of times it's not. And how does it sound? We'll try it. I mean, it sounds just like this when they're talking, and that's what it sounds like
actually,
in the fire, and that's what you hear over the radio.
Oh God.
that's actually pretty good. That's really
Yeah.
good.
And
That
so
would
I
be a
mean,
lot of I didn't copy. Send that
Yeah.
again.
10-9, 10-9.
Or
Yeah.
or it's funny, the dispatchers won't understand it, but the other units on scene, they'll oh, okay, I got it.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
and then there's other things, that get in the way, like a wind gets in the way of law enforcement sometimes. So there's other things that they have to challenge themselves with sprinklers going off above head, or getting them wet. But now they're making these Bluetooth mics that are inside their helmets.
Oh,
And
wow.
I'm excited to see how those are going to work, because if they work properly, it should be just like a law enforcement radio. So that would
Yeah.
really be a huge help to
Nice.
fire.
Well,
Yeah, the
and-
one thing with radios too, just to add
Cool.
on, is the radios are also programmed sometimes by fire departments per unit and per seat. So when I get into the paramedic unit, or I get into the fire truck, the tower, the tiller, whatever it is, right? When I'm going to I have 4 people in a tiller unit, which is a large tower unit.
Mhm.
I will have a radio on the driver's side, a radio on the front officer side, and just say 2 radios in the back. So I may not carry the radio I carry is mine for the day based upon what seat I'm assigned in that unit. And depending on the radio system, when I key up, it's not my name necessarily keying up on the radio identifier. It's the unit and the position that radio is programmed for.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Wow.
So
No,
sometimes on law enforcement, when law enforcement officers key up, you may see a unit ID, you may see an employee identification number and an officer's
Yeah.
last name, however it's
Right.
programmed. Fire is not that way, or at least in my experience. It's programmed to come up with the unit ID and the seat or position of that unit.
So you may radio to them and say, hey, incident commander, engine whatever, 401, or whatever your number is, engine 401 firefighter 2 needs something, but you don't know necessarily who that is.
that person is.
Right.
Wow. Interesting.
Neat.
That's
Right.
that's really kind of cool.
Yeah.
I think-
Now, in law enforcement, a little difference here is there was pretty much one primary channel, and maybe in law enforcement there was a side channel to run wanted checks, depending on
Sure,
how your
sure,
agency
sure.
was made up,
Yeah.
right? So we'll just say for this discussion, there's 2 channels in law enforcement.
Okay.
Just in fire dispatch, and depending upon your area, there are 2 primary radio channels. One is the primary dispatch. So all calls are just going out, just from dispatcher to unit. Then once a unit is en route, as soon as the unit leaves the station, they automatically switch to another unit or another radio channel.
Okay. Okay.
So, and that is designated by the locality, and it's designated by the type of call. So for example, I'm going to dispatch an inside gas leak. Okay, great. That's the primary channel. Then when I get in the unit and I'm going to the primary gas leak, I may switch to an alternate channel 1. Okay. But if I'm dispatched in the same unit to, say, a personal injury collision, I may switch to alternate channel 2.
What the hell?
Yeah.
How
So
many
it's
dispatchers do you have on duty? I mean,
Right.
is there a
300.
dispatcher waiting for each radio?
Usually in these situations, there's one dispatcher handling primary,
Okay.
and there's one dispatcher handling the primary response channel, and then 1 or 2 other dispatchers handling, I'll say, alternate channels for large scale incidents. Each locality defines what a large scale incident is. In my world, whenever a battalion chief, which is like essentially an incident commander, was
Mhm.
dispatched from onset, that incident automatically got its own radio channel and its own dispatcher. Now, there are other areas that we just don't have enough staffing or resources to handle one dispatcher per incident. So maybe that one dispatcher is going to have to handle the inside gas leak, the personal injury collision, whatever it is. But at least those are outside of the main dispatch channel, because one of the biggest differences that Leslie and Doug know, and that we all know, but that's different, is law enforcement will hold a call for days on end, especially a cold call or late report. That don't happen on fire side. Call comes in, you get the run order, send. It doesn't matter. Well, is this the closest stage? Is this the closest unit? This is the closest unit that's available. Go.
My God.
Wow. Wow. That's cool.
It is
Wow,
so
that's
true.
pretty
And so fire is it's very complex, and it's interesting to learn. It's a lot of fun, but not a day goes by that I live in Iowa. So a lot of our fire departments are made up of volunteers. So all the volunteers out there, EMS, fire, etc. Thanks for doing what you do, because we need you every day.
Yeah. I mean, Doug and
That
Leslie,
is-
coming from law enforcement, you dispatch the closest officer, right? Or closest
Yeah.
available.
Yeah.
And you look, and you kind of knew this beat PSA area runs with this area, like area 230 runs with 231 kind of thing, right?
Right.
Okay. And fire, particularly, you were talking, Joe, about like or mapping with AVL before kind of thing. It don't matter who runs with who. You may run with a station you haven't run with in 2 weeks, but it's the only resources we got. Go.
Yeah.
So do you get a response plan? Like, okay, so the call for service is that interior gas leak. So does the dispatcher get a recommended unit or a response plan that says, okay, these are the tones that you should use, or these are the pieces of apparatus that you need to send? Is that part of that process?
Yeah, depending on your CAD, and a lot of states are now implementing what's called MABUS, the the mutual aid box alarm structure.
I've heard
So
of that.
it tells you like which entities go. So if there's a major call here, and then the overflow agencies are, and it tells you which agencies will respond if they need help in that area. So mutual aid box alarm structure, which I think is really an important topic. And I think that when law enforcement says, what does fire do that we could utilize? That mutual aid box alarm structure, if you applied it to active shooter events, add a mutual aid box alarm structure where dispatch automatically knew who goes next, I think it would be helpful. So I think law enforcement should look at that MABUS box and say, what can we use and how can we apply it to active shooter events?
Yeah, and I think, Joe, and I know we're probably up against time here, but I think you've got a really good point, because there's some things that I've heard fire departments do, especially on scene. They identify who's in charge, and they immediately go into that ICS structure,
Right.
where law enforcement side, we just don't do that. And it can become very, very confusing, because now you've got competing egos on the radio and stuff like that. So mark that down for the next topic. I think that'd be a great one.
No, we used to listen to the scanner for the fire department when they would go out and do stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And you never ever hear them say what our officers would say when you send somebody from out of the area to another call. They're like, well, where's the other unit? What are they doing? How come they can't go? You just hear fire departments, okay, we're on our way, we're going. And it's just like, wait a minute, don't they fight about this stuff and say, it's too far, I'm too tired?
They do at meetings afterwards. If
Oh gosh, that's hysterical.
Send the wrong unit, if an agency, they care about their events. And if you send an agency that shouldn't have been sent, it's the agency that got sent's not going to complain normally. It's the agency that didn't get sent that's going to complain. So that's the difference.
Very unusual.
Yeah.
There's just different types of complaining between fire and law.
There is, and it's just, I mean, half the stuff, I never even heard of half these things, and it's like,
That's awesome.
It's
so cool.
crazy to see this kind of stuff. And I'll tell you a quick thing. I taught a leadership class at a fire department, which shall remain unnamed. I don't want to say where they are. But I talked to the battalion chief who brought me in, and he said, here's the problem we had. We had a fire that was just over the jurisdiction line from where our fire department goes, and they stopped, and they wouldn't go.
What?
And he goes, that house was on fire. And he goes, they made them wait. And he goes, we got rid of all those firefighters. And he goes, I told everybody, I don't care how far it is out of your area, you go. And he goes, most of the people would go, but these ones were so stuck on, well, that's not our area. That's past our line. And I was like, I couldn't believe it. Because I'm used to officers having issues with jurisdiction stuff, but I never heard of fire departments ever doing that. So it's my hat's off to firefighters and fire
Absolutely.
dispatchers. That's good stuff.
Yes. Yellow rock stars. Thank you. for
Yeah,
what
thank
do.
you for everything, keeping us safe. Doing smoke detector checks in the community is big on fire, whereas that's equivalent to community on patrol for law
Mhm.
enforcement kind of thing. So talking about changing lines, the lines of listenership has been growing. And so, Joe, can you tell us where we stand?
Absolutely. We're on every podcast platform. Make sure you check us out. And if you want to be a guest, especially if you dispatch fire or you dispatch law or medical, whatever your role is, make sure you email us at wespeakdispatch@gmail.com because we want you to be a guest so we can ask you about your knowledge and expertise to make it known to everybody.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, all.